I've been a night owl my whole life, so I work night shifts exclusively. I really don't work well with other people, whether they're my coworkers or not, so I picked a job I could do completely on my own. I became a nighttime janitor for my local school district after I graduated from high school. Schools have always had nightly cleaning as part of health codes in most areas, but obviously, in recent years, it's become much more important. My first job was in a fairly large K-12 school. There were a couple of daytime custodians as well, but at night it was just me and one other person splitting the school down the middle. My coworker and I barely ever interacted, which I appreciated a lot. Every single night, all the floors get mopped, revacuumed, every desk, table, and door handle is disinfected, and every toilet, urinal, and sink also gets cleaned. It takes a full 8-hour shift to accomplish, and for that entire time, I don't talk to a single person. It's great, honestly. Most of my coworkers are women, and they don't want me talking to them either. When I tell people about my job, a lot of them think the hardest part is cleaning up after the messes left by the students. For the most part, I guess they are right, but I always tell them I would rather plunge and clean 10 clogged and traumatized toilets every single night than ever have to work directly with another human being all day long, especially a horde of minors. These days, there's one example I give of why I say that. It was the night after Halloween. I came in for my usual shift and got started without even saying hello to my coworker. We started on opposite ends and met in the middle, so we would only see each other when we were finishing up. The first hour was mostly normal except for one obvious thing out of the ordinary. I always keep my music at a low volume on my headphones, but from outside them, I kept hearing things. Usually, all the other faculty are gone by 8 p.m., but sometimes there's somebody who stays late. I couldn't decide what I was hearing through my music, but I wasn't in the mood to turn it off, so I just ignored it. A little while later, I took a break from mopping to change the water in the bucket. I was gone for about 5 minutes, but on my way back to where I stopped, I walked past one of the hallways I had just mopped and noticed the wet floor sign had fallen over. For legal reasons, I had to step over the wet floor and stand it back up, then mop back over my tracks. Annoyed, I walked over to it but froze for a moment when something else caught my eye. There was another set of tracks in the water, leading to and from the sign. They were little footprints, something a kid would make. After I stood the sign back up, I followed the tracks, knowing I would have to mop over those too, basically redoing the whole hallway. The tracks ran all the way to the end, where there was a flight of stairs up to the second floor. From there, they dried up pretty quickly. I stormed up the stairs and got to the second floor, but nobody was there. I took my phone out of my pocket and paused my music so I would be able to hear if anyone was running around. Right as I looked down, I saw a flash of movement at the end of the hallway. I also heard a bunch of footsteps echoing across the empty school, so I started making my way to the end of the hall. By the time I got there, I still couldn't see anyone, but then I heard a little kid laughing. It felt like I was in a horror movie, but at that point, I was more annoyed than scared. I stood there looking around for a few seconds until I heard a crash from the first floor. I rushed downstairs and nearly flipped my lid when I saw the mop bucket I had just refilled was knocked over. The water was spilling everywhere in a huge pool. I absolutely swore my head off as I went back to the nearest janitor's closet for a dry mop and a bunch of towels. It took me half an hour to clean up that mess and then another 15 minutes to redo the hallway that got messed up, which meant my break was down to 15 minutes. However, I was so pissed off that I walked to the other side of the school and interrupted my coworker to ask if she had been messing with me. She looked completely dumbfounded and innocent. She asked if I was all right or needed any help, but to that, I just walked away. I set up again and got back to work. Another hour passed, and I managed to make up some lost progress. I was angrily powering through it, debating in my head the whole time about what I should do. I thought about reporting it to the school or maybe just calling the police myself, but in the end, I figured I would seem crazy to everyone, just like I did to my coworker, so nothing happened. Again, until 11 o'clock, out of nowhere, the lights shut off in the whole school. It was pitch black for about 3 seconds until the emergency lights turned on, giving everything a reddish hue. It came as a shock to me, and to be honest, I was worried. I tried to tell myself it was a malfunction or maybe some kids messing around, but my mind was going to all sorts of possibilities. I had keys to the electrical room where the light switches were, and I was the closest to it, so I stopped what I was doing and marched over. I was pissed off about losing more time and missing out on my entire break. But halfway there, something pushed those concerns out of my head. I heard the most blood-curdling scream of my life, the panic shriek of my coworker echoing endlessly. I stopped in my tracks, feeling like I had just been hit by an electric shock. Seconds later, I heard the sound of a door opening really loudly, like someone was ramming through it from the inside. I hoped it was my coworker escaping and not somebody else making their way into the school. I forced myself to keep going and finally made it to the electrical room. I was right outside the door trying to find the right key when I noticed that it was already cracked open. I pushed it open slowly, afraid of what I might see, and a shape appeared in front of me, standing unnaturally in the darkness. My blood ran cold. It could have been anyone. I gave up on trying to turn on the lights and instead reached over for my phone in my pocket. However, as soon as I moved, the figure bolted forward and slammed the door in my face. I cursed and jumped back, stumbling until my back hit the wall behind me. Once I regained my balance, I started running. I wanted to leave, but for once in my life, I thought about the well-being of somebody else and ran to the other side of the school to find my coworker. After checking a few of her hallways, I finally found her mop bucket sitting alone in the middle of the floor next to a bathroom. Without hesitation, I rushed over to it, hoping not to see any evidence that she had been hurt. Nothing seemed unusual except for the fact that she was nowhere to be found. I looked all around in the dim lighting, but as far as I could tell, I was alone. But not completely alone. The sound of a laughing child echoed in the distance again, striking fear into my chest. I clutched the handle of the mop, for lack of anything else to defend myself with, and lifted it out of the bucket, holding the end of the handle out like a spear. I faced the direction of the laughter, looking down the hallway so intently I got tunnel vision. In a moment of sheer terror, someone whispered, "Hello," into my ear. I turned around and, without thinking, jabbed the handle of the mop into their chest with all my might. I heard a grunt as the person who snuck up on me hit the ground and vomited only a second later. I shouted at them to tell me who they were, but then they started to cry. I could tell they were trying to hold it back, but they couldn't. Gradually, my eyes made out what I was looking at. It was a student kneeling on the floor. Suddenly, all my fear of danger was replaced with the fear of losing my job for hitting a student. However, as things shook out over the next few days, it turned out all right. Two twins in the 9th grade and their little brother got the idea to keep the spirit of Halloween going and prank the overnighters in the school by hiding in the lockers. There was one set of lockers in the whole building that wasn't in use and had no locks or ties on them, and those kids were skinny enough to fit in there and hide. After doing their after-school activities, they managed to avoid being expelled, probably from crying a lot. The school district understood my actions and let me keep my job, but I was transferred to a different school. All in all, this is why I don't like people especially kids. My name is Maury. I'm from the USA. Years ago, I worked in a home for older people as a nurse. I had the night shift. We were together drinking coffee on the second floor. All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang, so we thought a client had fallen. We decided that I would take the second floor and my colleague would take the first. Maybe we could find out what happened. While my colleague walked down the stairs, I looked at the monitor, which was on the second floor, and I saw someone in the department on the ground floor. He was inside the closed apartment. You could walk in over there, but you needed a code to get out. People with dementia lived there. We watched for a while, and the guy was stuck, he couldn't get out. We decided to go inside a room on the second floor of one of our clients because you needed a special key to go inside. We thought that was safer. We explained to her what was going on. She was perfectly capable of understanding the situation, and of course, we called 112. I explained the situation, and they told me they would come right away. I called my husband, who also had the night shift as a security guard in another town not too far away from us. He was just talking with the cops while I called 112 and said they were on their way. When I hung up, I looked outside and saw that guy climbing out the window. So I called back. They asked if something had changed. The police arrived, and we did a walk with them throughout the whole building. The guy broke the door in the kitchen. His stuff to break the door was there on the ground. The police couldn't really do much. I don't even know if they found the guy. Later that day, we heard that they were riding around the building 2 hours before the guy went in, and the guy had walked all over the ground floor, all while we were having our coffee on the second floor. That's a pretty scary thought. The next day, I had one more night shift. Though I don't have that much to fear, it was still pretty scary. So I asked if I could bring my 2 dogs. We had 2 golden at the time, and they were actually okay with that. So I brought them with me the next night. Nothing happened. The dogs walked with me the whole night, and of course, I let them outside now and then to do their thing. The other night, 2 other colleagues had the night shift, and guess what? They came back. They had robbed the safe. I always thought that the guy we had was just looking around to see if he could get away, but they had planned to come back for the safe the next night. But I'm guessing the 2 golden scared them off. I wouldn't go inside if there were 2 dogs like that either if I didn't know them. Later on, I always brought my dogs if I ever did the night shift over there. Most colleagues would be happy if they worked with me because they felt safe with the dogs, and so did I. The funny thing was that the dogs knew the route we always walked. After a few times, I didn't even put their leash on, they just knew. If we needed to help a client, they just waited in the hallway until I was done. A few clients knew it because I told them, knowing that they loved dogs. So when they needed our help, the dogs went with us in their apartment. Both the dogs and clients loved that. I used to work as a night clerk in a downtown condominium. The association had a lot of security concerns due to the way the building was constructed back in the late 60s. Both levels of the parking garage were accessible from street level, so there were a lot of possible entry points, many of which were located in blind spots of the security camera system. For that reason, I was required to make 2 rounds around the entire building during my shift to make sure no non-residents had found their way in. The most serious issue we had was the occasional carjacking, but what I encountered most often was homeless people who had found their way into the garage and were huddling in some corner for a bit of shelter. Kicking them back out into the street was by far my least favorite part of the job, but I had to do it. After working there for several months, I knew all the spots that people liked to hide in. The building was very old and had undergone many renovations in its lifetime, which created a lot of nooks and crannies, unnecessary concrete protrusions, sealed-off rooms, and hallways and stairs that led to nowhere. The creepiest spot in the whole building was so weird and potentially dangerous that I took a picture of it and brought it up to management. On the first floor of the garage, there was a door that opened up to a corridor directly underneath the ramp up to the second level of the garage. It was about 3 feet wide and ran about 20 to 30 feet, but it led to literally nowhere. At the end of it was a large water pipe with a valve, which was the only reason the space existed. But in the dark, with just a weak flashlight, that pipe seemed to take on many other forms. What made it dangerous, however, was the lock on the door. There was no padlock or keyhole on either side, but on the outside was a large sliding bolt latch. There was only one way in or out, and it locked from the outside with no way to unlock it from the inside. Ever since I discovered the spot, I couldn't help but imagine how easy it would be for someone to get trapped in there. However, nothing I said to management made any difference. They were already aware of it and had no intention of doing anything about it. Unfortunately, that meant I would have to open the door and check on it every night, but I never stepped foot inside of it. I was way too scared of it. Things went on like that for months, and then one day my worst fear was realized. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, halfway through my shift. I was doing my rounds in the parking garage, and everything was normal. It was a slow Wednesday night. There hadn't been any problems or suspicious activity on the cameras, so I was far from on edge at the time. But then, in one moment, I was forced to go on alert. I heard the sound of a door slamming across the garage. I wasn't exactly sure where it was, so I walked over to investigate. My heart sank a bit when I saw that the door to the dead-end hallway was wide open. I looked around to see if anyone was in the garage, but I appeared to be alone. I shouted to intimidate anyone if they were hiding somewhere I couldn't see, but I got no response and nobody appeared. I was just worried that there was somebody hiding in the dead-end hallway, so I walked the rest of the way. I shined my flashlight down the hallway, and for a moment, I was relieved to see that nobody was in there. There was, however, an empty glass bottle about 10 feet inside. I sighed and rolled my eyes, thinking that somebody had been drinking in there and had run out in a hurry once they saw me snooping around, accidentally making noise as they rushed. It wouldn't have been that hard for somebody to climb up on the cars parked there to get above the wall and hop the fence into the neighboring parking lot. By the time I got there, since the garage was partially underground in that spot, in fact, that's how a lot of people get in because the dead-end hallway happened to be in a prominent blind spot of the cameras. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to leave trash anywhere if I saw it, so I knew I had to pick up that bottle. Of course, I felt the anxiety bubbling up inside my gut just for knowing I had to walk a few steps inside that hallway. I almost didn't do it, but I rationalized myself into thinking there was no way somebody would pop out and lock me in. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, but right as I reached the bottle, the door slammed shut. I immediately ran back to the door, but by the time I got there, it was already locked. I started banging on the door and screaming for help, but there was nobody there. I felt like I was being buried alive, like I could barely breathe. If it weren't for my flashlight, I would have been in some deep trouble. I wouldn't have been able to see a thing. Once I realized I wasn't getting out anytime soon, I reached for my phone. To my utter heartbreak, however, there was no service at all. The walls were made of cinder blocks, the door was made of metal, and the entire 6-story building was on top of me. No matter what I tried, I couldn't call 911. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I was completely stuck. The only way I was getting out was if somebody opened the door from the outside. But it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and it would be hours before anybody left for work. During that time, whoever trapped me was doing whatever they pleased in the parking garage. I heard several car alarms go off, and I knew what was happening. Somehow, they all turned off after a few minutes. I kept banging on the door and shouting, but nobody came. After a while, if I'm being completely honest, I gave up hope that I would be free anytime soon and just focused on staying calm. I sat down against the wall and turned off my flashlight to save the battery, but only after making sure I was completely alone. Every few minutes, I banged on the door a bunch of times. It took me about 2 hours, but finally, I managed to get the attention of somebody going to work early in the morning. I thanked them as they let me out, but unfortunately, the next thing I had to do was call the cops because I quickly noticed that a dozen cars had been broken into. There was broken glass all over the parking lot from all the windows that had been shattered. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to trap me in there and how to silence the alarms of the cars they were breaking into. We only had security guards on the weekends, and it left us vulnerable on a seemingly benign Wednesday. All in all, there were tens of thousands of dollars in damages and theft, and I was fired from my job. Not that I would want to go back anyway. The culprit was never identified on the cameras and was never caught. I work in the pro department of a home improvement company. I worked the closing shift with another cashier, who I'll call Aria. Aria's a really kind but quite timid cashier. She's also very pretty, so she has a lot of contractors hit on her. It's usually not that worrisome, though a few compliments, maybe a dinner invite, which she'd politely decline. I would probably ask her out as well if it wasn't for one detail: Aria does have a girlfriend. So being hit on by guys on a daily basis makes her rather uncomfortable. When we first met, I told her she ought to tell those guys about being gay, but she kept saying it wasn't any of their business, so she kept that part to herself. Aria has become my best friend, and having another cashier there with you keeps things from getting lonely. We even cover for each other's lunch breaks. One day, when I came back from lunch, Aria started telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her. She said she politely turned him down, saying she was with someone already, and while he didn't seem happy, he did leave. I shrugged it off as nothing more than the usual horny guy and laughed it off. But later that day, the man came back. Aria wasn't there, as she had left to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked rather normal, probably handsome to most women, but he acted off. After looking around the area, I asked him if I could help him with anything. "I'm here to see Aria," he told me. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which she said yes, so he had come back in to pick her up. I told him she had left for the day, a usual lie everyone tells to cover for their friends. His smile went away as he started looking annoyed. He said he wanted to speak to Aria and ask her out again, which contradicted what he had just told me about accepting his previous invite. I told him he could not do that, which caused him to cross his arms and asked me why not. I'm not the best liar when it comes to making up excuses on the spot. However, I didn't want to tell him Aria was gay if she didn't want him to know it. So I just blurted out that Aria was my fiancée. His annoyed look went to confusion as he asked me how someone as pretty as she is could go out with someone like me. I'm not a Chris Evans or anything, but I don't think I'm that bad looking. I told him it didn't matter and that she and I were getting married in a couple of months, so he needed to back off. He gave me a death look but didn't say anything. After an awkward silence, he left. After Arya had gotten back, I told her what went down. She asked me to describe him, and after I told her what he looked like, she said that was the same guy who came in before. She was a bit creeped out by what went down but found the fiancé excuse rather funny. She even stated she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I'm guessing was a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the man. At this point, one night after it had gotten dark, Arya and I were getting the trash together so we could close down the registers and go home. Just then, we heard a bang at the door, causing both of us to nearly jump out of our skins. It was the guy again. He had a wild look in his eyes as he kept his face pressed against the glass. "We're closed," I told him, but he insisted he needed to come in. Arya yelled again to tell him she's not interested and for him to go away and leave her alone. But he yelled that he's not here for her, he's here for me. He then says that if he can take out her husband, then she'd be all his. Based on that, he wanted to kill me. I told Arya to run to the manager's office and call the police, and I'd stay here and watch him. I won't lie though, I was pretty afraid to be in that tiny little area. If the guy was able to get in, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him. Plus, the store doesn't allow us to have self-defense items on us, so I was on my own here. The guy then started ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy. The doors were rattling. I could have sworn they were going to come off their base. Just then, Arya came running back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand, yelling that the cops were on their way. Finally, the man decided to leave. The closing manager met the officers when they came, and he took them to review the cameras. Thankfully, the man was caught and arrested, but Arya and I felt unsafe working there any longer. We're still friends and even attend the same college together, but we have separate jobs now while we pay our way through classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the rogue man, as I hate to imagine what he might have done to me, or worse, what he might have done to her. She says she's glad I was there for her as well, as having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. It was a wake-up call for me as to how dangerous it can be for some girls when an interested guy just doesn't want to take no for an answer. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now. It was 2017, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, John, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, John trained me. Our job was the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, nothing exciting, just checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, or the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which contributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walked in and asked if we had any rooms available. Usually, if someone sketchy came in, my boss had me lie and say no. But he seemed normal at the moment, so without hesitation, I said yes. I began creating the reservation on the computer when I noticed he started swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he was being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I gave him his key, and he was on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man came back from his room and slammed his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump, absolutely frightened. I looked up to see him just staring at me. He cracked the door and put his head through and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting John because he's the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from John, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I went into absolute panic mode. I ran into the back office, locked the door, and pulled out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I heard the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground or just calling the police when I was feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I replied, "I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." I then started calling John over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I started hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he came out, and I said, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agreed. Thankfully, I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent on walking behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stopped at a room, and I stopped at his room a few doors down. I smiled and said, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it was clearly said on the door. This whole time, he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. After letting him into his room, I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. I found out there was a lone woman staying in the other room he was trying to get into. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns over. I felt bad for confiding in him about the guy, but he seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take it very seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened, but this was one of the worst. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.